The notary's office on St. Laurent smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee, and I remember thinking that was a strange place for your whole life to change. My mother's lawyer, a quiet man named Mr. Okafor, who had handled her affairs for nearly 2 decades, sat behind a desk that was too big for the room. My brother was already there when I arrived. He'd brought his wife. She was wearing a blazer I recognized from my mother's closet, and neither of them said anything when I walked in. I had driven 4 hours from Sudbury for this, 4 hours after 6 years of driving that same highway every second weekend, every Christmas, every time Mom called at 2 in the morning because she'd fallen getting up for water and couldn't reach the phone from the floor. My brother lived 40 minutes away. In 6 years I could count his visits on one hand. Mr. Okafor read the will the way people read weather reports, carefully, without drama. The house on Dunmore Crescent, assessed at just over $800,000, went to my brother. The registered savings accounts, the TFSA, the GIC she'd been building since the 90s, all of it to my brother. The car, the furniture, the antique sewing cabinet our grandmother had brought from Portugal that my mother had promised me when I was 7 years old, all to my brother. I sat very still. My brother's wife made a sound I can only describe as a breath that wanted to be a laugh. When Mr. Okafor finished, he looked at me over his glasses and said, "And for your daughter, she has left this." He slid a small envelope across the desk, not a check, not a legal document. A regular white envelope, the kind you buy in a pack of 100 at Dollarama. My name was written on it in my mother's handwriting. My brother leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, and left it at that. I didn't open the envelope in that office. I wouldn't give either of them that. I took it, put it in my coat pocket, shook Mr. Okafor's hand because he hadn't done anything wrong, and walked outside into a February afternoon so cold my eyes watered immediately, or maybe they didn't need the cold's help. I sat in my car for a long time with the heat running. Then I opened the envelope. Inside was a single index card. On it, in my mother's small, careful cursive, was a name and a phone number. Underneath, 3 words: "Call her first." I didn't recognize the name. I didn't recognize the number. It wasn't a local area code, not Toronto, not Ottawa, not anywhere I knew. I turned the card over. Nothing else. I drove to a Tim Hortons on the way out of the city and ordered a double-double I didn't want, and I sat at a table by the window and I called the number. It rang twice. "Vera Sinclair," said the woman on the other end. Her voice was steady and warm, the voice of someone who has learned to be calm because calm is useful. I told her my name, she said. "I've been waiting for your call. Your mother told me you'd call after." I asked her who she was. She said, "I'm a solicitor, and I think we should meet as soon as you can manage it. Because there are some things you need to know about your mother's estate that were not covered in today's reading." I should explain what the last 6 years actually looked like. My mother was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's when I was 27. I had just started a job I liked. Junior project coordinator for a land development firm in Sudbury. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine and I was good at it, and I had a small apartment with a bay window where I kept too many plants. My brother called me the week after the diagnosis. He said, "Someone needs to step up." I waited for him to say he would. He didn't. He said, "You know I have the kids and Serena's hours at the hospital are brutal right now." His wife is a radiology technician. Her hours were not, as far as I could observe over the following 6 years, any more brutal than most people's. So I stepped up. That's what it's called, isn't it? Stepping up. As though being the one who shows up is a choice you make, once, cleanly, instead of 10,000 small decisions stretched across 6 years. Every weekend I could manage. Every medical appointment I could book remotely and then attend over the phone, or drive down for when my mother's doctor said it was important to be in person. I learned what a hone and yar scale was. I learned how to adjust her grab bars. I learned that she preferred audiobooks to television in the evenings, but she would never admit it because she thought television was more sociable. I did not complain about this to my brother, mostly because complaining to my brother was like speaking into a disconnected phone. He would say, "That sounds hard," and then the conversation would end and nothing would change. My mother never asked me to do it. That's important. She never asked. She would have found it mortifying to ask, because she was a woman who had spent her whole life making herself not a burden, and the disease was already enough of an indignity, without adding the admission that she needed her daughter more than her son. But she knew. Of course she knew. 3 years in, on a Sunday afternoon when I'd driven down to help her sort through some boxes in the basement, She sat down on the stairs and looked at me and said, "You know I see it, don't you? Everything you do." I said, "I know, Mom," she said. "I'm going to make it right." I told her she didn't have to. I meant it. I wasn't doing any of it for a payout. I was doing it because she was my mother and she was sick and someone had to, and the someone was me. That's all. But she'd looked at me in a way that meant she'd already decided. I didn't ask her what she meant. I should have. Maybe it would have helped me understand what was in that envelope a little faster. I met Vera Sinclair 10 days later, at her office in Ottawa. She was a small woman in her 60s with short silver hair and reading glasses on a chain, and her office was so aggressively organized it made me feel like my whole life was a mess by comparison. She had known my mother for 8 years. They'd met at a support group, not a Parkinson's group, she clarified, but a financial literacy group for women over 50 that ran out of a community center in the Glebe. My mother had been meticulous about her finances her whole life. She'd bought that house in 1991, paid off the mortgage early, invested quietly and consistently, never talked about money, because in our family money was a private matter. What my mother had also done, apparently, was talk to a solicitor. Vera laid it out for me slowly, and I will try to do the same. The will that Mr. Okafor read was real. It was legal. It did, in fact, leave the house and the registered accounts to my brother. My mother had signed it 5 years ago, and it was exactly what it appeared to be. What my brother did not know, and what Mr. Okafor did not know because he was not involved in this particular arrangement, was that my mother had spent the last 4 years quietly and deliberately building a second structure. She had set up a trust. Not a complicated one, Vera explained, but a well-constructed one. A Henson Trust, specifically, a vehicle often used for beneficiaries with disabilities but adaptable. Over 4 years, my mother had been making regular transfers, modest amounts, never large enough to trigger questions, spread across a schedule that Vera had helped her design. She'd liquidated some older investments, she'd redirected savings. She'd been patient and consistent, and she had done it all entirely within the law, with a solicitor she trusted and a plan she kept to herself. The trust held $460,000. It was in my name. I had to ask Vera to repeat the number. She did. She also slid a letter across the desk. Handwritten, 3 pages, in my mother's cursive. I'm not going to share what it said because it was mine, but I will tell you that my mother explained every decision she had made, including why she had left the house to my brother. She had left him the house because he had 3 children, and she did not want them to feel her death as a financial catastrophe. And because she believed, correctly, that he would sell it within a year and pocket the money regardless. She wanted to feel that she had tried, with him. She had left me the trust because she wanted it to come from somewhere he couldn't touch and couldn't see and couldn't contest. She had done her research. A properly structured trust with an independent trustee. In this case, Vera was not part of the estate for probate purposes. There was nothing to challenge. She had thought of everything. At the bottom of the 3rd page she had written, "You were there, every time. I want you to be able to build something. Go build something." I sat in Vera's organized office and I cried so hard she brought me a box of tissues and a glass of water and went to stand by the window and look out at the street while I pulled myself together. She was tactful about it. I appreciated that. My brother called me a week after the will reading. He'd been quiet up until then, I assumed because he was busy organizing the sale of the house, which Vera had already confirmed to me was in process. He'd had an estate agent in within 72 hours of our mother's death. When he called, he sounded relaxed, almost jovial. He said it was good that things had been settled clearly, and that he hoped I wasn't feeling any kind of way about it. I said I was fine. He said, "Mom always said she wanted the house kept in the family, but with the market the way it is," he said, "and the TFSA was substantial, so that'll help us get the kids set up for school eventually." I know it's a lot, Tate. I said, "It is." He said, "If there's anything in the house you want, sentimental stuff before it sells, you're welcome to come by." I said I'd think about it. Then he said, "I hope you know there were no hard feelings in any of this. Mom made her choices." I said, "She did." We hung up. I went to bed that night and I thought about my mother sitting at her kitchen table with Vera's number in her address book and a plan in her head, and a disease that was making her hands shake and her voice catch, and still doing the careful, methodical work of making sure I would be all right. 4 years of small transfers, 4 years of patience, 4 years of keeping a secret so clean it didn't cast a shadow. She'd done it without a word to me because that if she told me, I would have told her not to. She knew me completely. I didn't do anything with the information for 3 months. I needed time, and I think my mother would have understood that. Vera continued managing the trust. I went back to work in Sudbury. I watered my plants. But I should tell you about the party. My brother and his wife. I should give her a name. She's earned one, she's Serena, and she had been present for every moment of this without once visiting my mother in 6 years. They threw a dinner party in April. I know this because I was not invited, but my cousin Deborah was. And Deborah and I have always been close. And Deborah told me about it afterward, with the uncomfortable energy of someone who witnessed something they wish they hadn't. It was a celebration, not a housewarming. They hadn't moved into the Dunmore house. They'd sold it in March, just as Vera predicted, and bought a new build in Barhaven that my brother had apparently been eyeing for 2 years. The dinner was to celebrate the new house, funded by the proceeds of the sale and the TFSA my mother had spent 30 years building. My brother had given a toast. He talked about my mother. He said she had always wanted the family to be stable and secure. He said he hoped she was watching, and feeling cried a little. Deborah said she hadn't been able to finish her food. She'd texted me from the bathroom at the party. I don't know how you're being so calm about all of this. I texted back, I'm not, really, but I'm okay. She wrote, did she really leave you nothing? I wrote, no. She left me exactly what I needed. Deborah didn't understand that text until about 6 months later, when I bought my building. Here's what I did with $460,000 and 6 years of knowing what I was doing. I found a mixed-use property on the edge of downtown Sudbury, 3 commercial units on the ground floor, 4 residential units above. It was underpriced because it needed work. The previous owner had let the electrical go, and the ground floor tenant situation was complicated. I knew how to read a building's problems because I had spent 6 years learning to read my mother's house and anticipate what it needed before it became a crisis. I put in an offer in June. It was accepted in August. I spent the fall managing the renovation. By February, exactly 1 year after the will reading, almost to the week, every unit was tenanted. The commercial spaces had a physiotherapy clinic, a photography studio, and a dry cleaner who'd been in the neighborhood for years and just wanted somewhere stable. The residential units filled in 3 weeks. Vera helped me structure it properly. A numbered company, a separate operating account, everything clean and documented. She is very good at what she does. I did not tell my brother. He found out because Deborah eventually told him. The way information travels in families osmotically, through enough dinners and enough unguarded moments. He called me in the spring. He sounded different than he had before. Not jovial. Deborah says you bought a rental property, he said. I said I did. In Sudbury. That's right. There was a pause. Then he said, where did you get the money for that? I said, Mom. The pause this time was longer. He said, but the estate. I said, Mom planned for a lot of things. She was always very organized. I let that sit. You know that about her. He didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear him working through it. Not the legal mechanics. Because my brother has never been interested in the mechanics of anything, but the shape of it. The implication that the thing he had thought was a complete victory was not in fact the whole picture. That there had been a room in the house he hadn't known about, he said. She set up a trust. It wasn't a question exactly. I said, she did. He said, when? I said, 4 years ago. Another pause. Then, and you knew, I said. I found out after Mr. Okafor wasn't involved. He was quiet for a long time. I let the quiet sit. There was nothing accusatory in my voice because I wasn't accusing him of anything. I was just telling him true things. Finally, he said, I didn't know she could do that. I said she was always smarter than we gave her credit for. He said, I didn't mean I said I know Liam. I used his name. I don't usually use his name. He said, so what, that's it? She just decided to split things that way? I said, she made her choices, you said that yourself. He didn't have an answer for that. There was no answer for that. He'd handed me that sentence in February, in the easy confidence of someone who believed the game was over, and I had held on to it quietly for 14 months, not for this moment, but this moment was when it became relevant. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing. He said Serena was fine. The kids were fine. He hoped things were going well for me. I said they were. He said he supposed we'd see each other at Deborah's thing in July. I said probably. He said goodbye. I said goodbye. I sat by my bay window for a while after. The plants had multiplied. I'd had more time and space to pay attention to them this past year. The fern that had been half dead when I moved in was enormous now. People sometimes ask me, not many people, because I'm a private person and I don't broadcast my business, but occasionally when someone hears the outline of this story, they ask whether I'm angry, whether I feel like I was cheated or robbed or treated like I didn't matter. And the honest answer is yes, for a while. In that car outside the notary's office in February, with my eyes watering from cold or something else, I was angry in a way that felt cellular, like it was in my blood. But the anger changed shape over time, because the more I sat with it, the more I understood that the story I thought I was in, the one where I was the daughter who got nothing, was never actually the story. My mother had written a different story. Quietly, patiently, with arthritic hands and a solicitor she trusted. She had written a story where I was the one she chose to give something real, something that would last. Something my brother couldn't sell at market value within 60 days of her funeral. She gave him what he wanted because she'd made her peace with who he was. She gave me what she thought I needed because she knew who I was. I have thought about my brother and his wife in their new build in Barhaven. I have thought about the toast he gave, the crying, the certainty that the arrangement was complete and fair and finished. I have thought about the dinner I wasn't invited to. I don't have the feelings about it that you might expect. I don't feel triumphant, exactly. I feel settled. The way you feel when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time and you finally set it down in a place where it belongs. My building is doing well. The physiotherapy clinic just signed a 5-year lease. One of the upstairs tenants, an older woman who reminds me sometimes of my mother, the precision with which she moves through the world, the way she notices things, brought me butter tarts at Christmas. I ate 3 of them standing at my kitchen counter at 10 o'clock at night, and I thought about my mother. I thought about an index card with a name and a phone number and 3 words. Call her first, she knew I would. She knew, even in the fog of everything that day would be, that I would hold myself together long enough to get to my car, and that I would take the envelope, and that eventually I would open it and read her handwriting and do exactly what she asked. She knew me, she always did, and she spent 4 years quietly, making sure that when the moment came, I would have something to stand on. That's the thing about mothers who love you without making a fuss about it. You don't always see them building until they're done.